I still remember the smell. Burned fuel. Hot metal. A faint trace of jungle mud baked into the fuselage. We had dragged the wreck across Clark Air Base earlier that morning, January 31st, 1945, under a gray Philippine sky that still echoed with distant artillery. Our mechanics gathered silently around the strange aircraft, a Mitsubishi G4M. The Japanese called it Ichishiki Rikujo Kogiki Ki. We called it something else, a flying coffin. I was an aircraft engineer with the 5th Air Force. I'd seen my share of twisted wrecks since the attack on Clark Field on December 8, 1941, when these very bombers turned our air power into smoking craters in a matter of hours. But this one, intact enough to study, felt like seeing the face of a ghost that had haunted us since war began. The first thing that shocked me, when we cut through the skin of the wing, it was paper-thin aluminum.no armor. No reinforcement. I turned to my captain. "Where are the self-sealing tanks?" He stared at the exposed cell like he was staring at madness. There was nothing protecting the fuel. No Raberlining. No sealing foam. Just a thin sheet keeping thousands of gallons of high-octane gasoline from the open air.tos. This was unthinkable. Since 1942, our B-17s and B-24s had armored tanks and self-sealing protection. A burst of tracers might punch through, but it wouldn't turn our bombers into torches. But the Betty. One bullet. One spark. One instant inferno. Somebody behind me whispered the nicknames we all knew. One-shot Zippo. Flying lighter. I had seen them ignite over Guadalcanal, falling like fiery meteors into the sea. Whole crews, trained men, sons, fathers, trapped inside a steel furnace. We didn't hate the men inside those bombers. War taught us to fear them, kill them, but not hate. Not when we saw how they died. We climbed into the fuselage. Inside, the space felt cramped, almost primitive. Control cables exposed, minimal armor near the cockpit, a thin plate behind the pilot's seat, barely enough to stop a handgun round. But the range, we knew the numbers. The Betty could reach over 3,700 miles, farther than any Allied bomber in 1941-42, a plane that could fly from Formosa to the Philippines, from Rabaul to Guadalcanal, from Saipan to Pearl Harbor, if they dared. Suddenly it became clear. To Japanese designers, range meant victory. Crew survival was a secondary concern, or no concern at all. A sergeant beside me tapped the floor. "That's where they held the torpedoes," he said. "The infamous Type 91. The same weapon that on December 10, 1941, sank the British giants, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, the first time in history battleships fighting back were sunk solely by air power. The world changed that day, and these bombers changed it. But their brilliance was also their curse. On August 8, 1942, just 2 days after the Marines landed at Guadalcanal, 18 out of 23 Bettys were shot down by our fighters. More than 120 trained aviators lost in under 10 minutes. We'd seen the gun camera footage. One tracer hit. The wing became a torch. The entire aircraft blossomed into a fireball mid-air, like a match thrown into gasoline. Even now, thinking of it, I can feel the heat. We reached the nose compartment. The plexiglass was shattered, sand and dust covered the gun sight. I put my hand on the metal frame. It was riddled with bullet holes. This aircraft had seen fear and paid the price. I could almost hear the last breaths of the crew, their shouts. The panic when flames surged. The realization that there was no way out. I had seen enemy planes fall. But for the first time, I felt something different. Pity. As we documented every detail, fuel capacity, gun placement, engine type, I thought of the men who designed this machine, Mitsubishi engineers in 1939 to 1940, under creative genius but brutal doctrine. Endurance above armor. Speed above safety. No parachutes for early crews. Too much weight. No self-sealing tanks. Too heavy. No armor. Unnecessary if you never get hit. It was faith turned into aluminum. Faith that they would never lose air superiority. Faith that their pilots would fight with spirit strong enough to defy bullets. The tragic mistake disguised as strategy. One moment kept returning to my mind. April 18, 1943. Bougainville Betty bombers carried Admiral Yamamoto his final flight. Our P-38 Lightnings intercepted them, and history turned upside down. Even the mastermind of Pearl Harbor died inside his own creation. Trapped in flames, we finished documenting the wing structure when one of our men, a young corporal, glanced at me and said, "They knew they were flying death traps, and they flew anyway." That hit me harder than any statistic. Courage doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like climbing into a bomber you know won't bring you back home. Outside, on the runway, the afternoon rain began to fall. Steam rose from the metal skin of the aircraft. Almost like the bomber was breathing, I stood beside the wing, rain dripping off my helmet, and felt a strange sadness. Japan may have designed this plane to conquer the Pacific. Instead, it became a machine that killed its OWN.AS. We left the hangar. I looked back one last time. We feared the Betty when the war began. We respected it in the skies. We pitied it on the ground. And now, studying it up close, I understood the truth. Victory isn't just about what you build, it's about what you protect. This aircraft gave Japan reach, but never gave its aviators a chance to grow old. I stepped into the fading daylight, knowing this was just the beginning. Because the Betty's story didn't end in a Philippine hangar. It burned on every horizon of this war. We first encountered the Betty not in a hangar, but in fire. December 8, 1941. Just hours after the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, our airfields at Clark and IBA in the Philippines were hammered by waves of Betty bombers. I was a young airman then, too young to fear death properly. The sky turned black with smoke. Our P-40s burned on the ground, engines silent. We looked up and saw the future of the war streaking overhead. Those long, slender wings, that green camouflage shimmering against the sun. The roar of twin engines, and then the whistle of falling bombs. In 20 minutes, they erased an air force. We felt helpless, ashamed, defeated before we had a chance to fight. The Betty had arrived months later. After surviving evacuation, disease, the endless retreat, I found myself assigned to New Guinea, repairing fighters torn by coastal humidity and the barrels of Zero fighters. And always, we knew the real danger came at dusk. When the Bettys arrived, low, fast torpedo runs above the water, straight toward our ships. The first time I saw them attack our fleet near Milne Bay, 1942, I remember thinking, they're too exposed. They'll never make it back. But they didn't turn away. They dove straight through flak curtains so thick you could walk on them. One hit from a 20mm shell would ignite their fuel tanks. But they preferred death to retreat. That terrified us. Men who do not fear dying are the deadliest enemy of all. Then came Guadalcanal, the furnace of the Pacific. We received intelligence of an incoming strike. 23 Betty bombers escorted by a swarm of Zeros. Our radar was crude, but good enough. We scrambled our F-for-F Wildcats. I watched from the ground, sweating, teeth clenched, as black trails scarred the sky. It was over in minutes. 18 Bettys shot down. More than 120 airmen dead. I saw one bomber fall so slowly, flames licking its wings, that I thought the crew might escape. Then the fire touched a fuel cell. The entire aircraft vanished into a single blast. Gone. 30 lives. Without a trace point. One of our pilots said later, "They didn't fall. They vanished." The men inside those planes believed in Japan's destiny. But destiny doesn't stop gasoline from exploding. In the following months, we saw the Betty again and again. They weren't cowards. They weren't fools. They were sacrifices. Japan needed long-range strike aircraft to hold its new empire stretching from Burma to the Solomons. So designers stripped everything away. Armor equals removed self-sealing tanks equals removed weight equals saved range equals extreme. It was a gamble. Kill before getting hit. Or die in flames. Early war. Strategy made sense. With the Zero dominating dogfights, who could intercept Bettys at 600 miles out? But wars evolved. By mid-1943, we had faster fighters, the P-38 Lightning, the Corsair, the Hellcat. We picked Bettys apart from long distance. Every mission became a suicide mission long before kamikazes existed. I remember the first Betty we saw attempt something new, defensive formations. Tight, overlapping machine gun arcs from nose, dorsal mount, waist guns, tail. Gunners firing tracers so bright it looked like they were spitting sparks, but no matter how they tightened up, the weak skin tore like parchment. Fire spread faster than any fire extinguisher could hope to contain. The Japanese prisoner told an interpreter, "We fly with fuel surrounding us, we are already dead when we take off." That truth changed something in us. We still shot them down. We had to. But we stopped feeling triumphant. Then came one of the most astonishing uses of the Betty. April 18, 1943, Operation Vengeance, the mission to intercept Admiral Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor. Our P-38s hunted a precise formation of 2 Bettys and 6 Zero escorts. The ambush succeeded. The lead Betty crashed into the jungle. Yamamoto died inside a fire he unknowingly helped design. Even as we read the report, there was no joy. War is full of ghosts. He simply became another. Late 1943, Japan's confidence cracked. Their pilots, once invincible, were now students facing seasoned killers. Bettys tried nighttime raids. We invented night fighters. They tried flying low. We strafed them from above. They tried escorting with more fighters. We destroyed the fighters first. Betty crews saw death everywhere and kept flying. That was what haunted us most. When we finally captured a mostly intact Betty, the one I inspected, its logbook showed over 900 hours flown. That's a miracle on wings. Inside, I noticed tiny folded paper charms, prayers, protective talismans from family and children. Each one a reminder that there were human beings inside the enemy's machine. Suddenly the burned wrecks I'd seen felt heavier in my heart. Every explosion I cheered was a family's grief. Somewhere across the SAS I stepped off the ladder. One of our intel officers said, "They traded lives for miles." Yes, and in early war that trade paid off. Prince of Wales and Repulse destroyed. 90 minutes, Philippines air power devastated. First day, Dutch East Indies defenses shattered, Allied bases struck beyond imagination, but by 1944, that trade became a butcher's bill Japan could no longer afford. Bettys weren't just falling. They were disappearing from the sky. The deeper truth settled into us gradually. We did not defeat the Betty. Its own design killed it. As long as the empire expanded, range was power. But when the Allies pushed back, fire was inevitable. The same design choice that once frightened us now filled our dreams with burning wings. The rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds above Clark Air Base. I wiped grease from my hands and stared once more at the captured bomber. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a marvel. It was a reminder. Ambition without protection is just another way to die. The war was changing. The Betty would change with it, becoming something even darker. But that was only beginning. We learned to fear silence. Because the Betty thrived in the dark. By late 1943, Japan changed tactics. No more daylight raids that ended in burning metal over the sea. Instead, they came when the sun was gone, when our eyes were tired and our nerves raw. I remember my first night attack at Henderson Field. Black sky, sweat dripping down my back despite the cool air. Every shadow felt like a warning. Then that sound, the distant hum of twin Mitsubishi engines. Like an angry swarm. A voice shouted, "Bettys! Incoming! Southeast!" We dove into trenches as runway lights snapped off. Explosions ripped the ground. Showers of sparks and sand raining down like stars turned to shrapnel. We fired blindly upward. Tracers slicing the dark. Searchlights hunting ghosts. The Betty crews flew at wave-top height, invisible until their torpedoes splashed. Point one blew apart a fuel dump behind us. A fireball so bright it turned night into white daylight. The Betty that released Itri to climb away and vanished into a sheet of flame when a fire found a wing. Night hid no one for long, but it hid the screaming that we adapted. Fast UP-70 night fighters, radar, searchlight traps. Every new trick we invented turned the Betty's daring into suicide. But still, they kept coming. A Japanese prisoner later told us, "If we succeed, we die heroes. If we fail, we die with honor. There is no third path." That was the creed of the empire. Obedience was life, and life was a privilege few could keep long. Then came the Rabaul nightmare. Late 1943, early 1944, the Imperial stronghold at Rabaul was hammered day and night. We sent hundreds of bombers and fighters to make sure nothing inside survived. The Bettys tried to fight back, sometimes 20 in a wave, sometimes only 3. They were so predictable. Same approach paths, same altitudes, same desperation. We slaughtered them. I once counted 6 Bettys falling. In less than 2 minutes, each one bursting like a match dipped in gasoline. The air stank of burning fuel. Of burning men. One pilot near me whispered, "I hope someone prays for them." No one answered. We just loaded more ammunition. War does not allow too much empathy. But what I remember most was the after. When dawn broke, we could see black stains drifting in the currents. Oil slicks with no survivors. A Betty wing washed ashore once, twisted like a skeleton hand frozen mid-reaching. Inside the metal, a single shoe, still tied. I stared at it far too long. BY 1944, the Betty, once feared, became pitted. Her speed no longer saved her. Her escorts died faster than they climbed. Her range meant nothing if she never returned home. But Japan had one final transformation in store, a role darker than bombing, darker than night raids, delivering suicide weapons. The first time we learned the name Oka, cherry blossom, we thought it sounded poetic. Then we saw what it meant. A tiny rocket-powered craft with a single pilot and a warhead in the nose. A man becomes the fuse. Bettys carried them under their bellies, slow, fragile carriers bringing death strapped beneath them. Their mission: get close. Enough for the Oka to ignite and plunge into a ship faster than any gun could track. One hit could tear a destroyer apart. We had nightmares imagining what a squadron could do to a carrier deck. But the Bettys never got close. Our Hellcats fell on them like hawks tearing into wounded doves. They exploded mid-air, taking the Oka and Pilato a fiery grave far from any target. 1 mission. 16 Bettys launched. All 16 destroyed. Not one Oka released. Men died for nothing. Not even a dent in a ship's paint. I wrote a single line in my maintenance log that day. How long can a nation burn its sons before it burns itself? The more we captured Japanese aircraft, the more we understood. The Betty had never been a mistake. It was a symbol. Range over armor, boldness over caution, sacrifice over survival. That philosophy built an empire in less than a year and destroyed an Air Force in the same amount of time. January 1945, when we inspected the captured Betty at Clark Field, one of our engineers said quietly, "This plane was built for a world Japan thought existed. A world where no fighters intercepted them, where every strike found the enemy helpless, where every mission was a glorious victory. But empires don't freeze in time, wars evolve, enemies learn." The Betty did not change fast enough. After the inspection, I stood alone beside its fuselage, silent, scorched, stripped. I traced my hand along the thin metal skin, so light, so vulnerable. And yet, that aircraft had carried the hopes of a nation further than anyone believed possible. I thought of the crews, pilots barely older than boys, radio men gripping family photos, gunners praying their bullets would buy one more mile home. They were not devils, not faceless foes. They were aviators trusted with steel wings and ordered to fly into hell. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Fire reveals what humans hide, and every flame has a cost." The Betty burned its cost into the sky, one fireball at a time. But the war wasn't over. Japan still had thousands of aircraft, and soon, they would unleash waves of pilots who welcomed the flames, men who believed death itself was the weapon, men who laughed at survival, men who would make the Betty look merciful by comparison. Their words spread whispered across the Pacific. Kamikaze, and they were coming. But that was only beginning. I thought I had seen every shape of death. That I was wrong. The first time I heard the word kamikaze, I didn't believe men could choose fire over life. That I thought it was rumor, fear exaggerating desperation. Then I watched one dive. October 25, 1944, Leyte Gulf. A Japanese plane, a Zero, fell from the clouds like a stone with purpose. That no evasive turns, no guns firing, no attempt to live. Just a straight line of hate and conclusion. When it struck the deck of the USS St. Lo, the world split open. A flash brighter. Then noon. A scream louder than engines, ship's steel curling like paper. The St. Lo sank in 30 minutes. Men in the water cried out, voices mixed with steam and burning oil. That I realized then. A plane that tries to survive is predictable. That a plane that wants to die is unstoppable. And into that new kind of war came the Betty bomber once more. Not as a predator, as a coffin. We soon learned the plan. White heavy checkmark Bettys would carry Oka rocket bombs. White heavy checkmark. They would approach at low altitude. White heavy checkmark drop the pilot-controlled missiles. White heavy checkmark. Then flee or die trying, but fleeing was fantasy. Oka pilots called themselves thunder gods. Betty crews began calling themselves dead men flying. One prisoner told his interrogator, "Our body and the plane are the same thing now." March 21, 1945. The first Oka attack. We detected them late at a formation of Bettys. Slow silhouettes over blue water, escorted by Zeros struggling to keep up. We scrambled. The first Betty was hit long before release range. Flames burst from its wings like angry flags. We saw the Oka detach. Not by choice but torn free in the blast. Falling, falling, falling. It struck the ocean and vanished as if the sea swallowed disappointment whole. The Betty broke apart. I still hear the echoes sometimes, metal, screaming like a living thing begging not to die. Only one Betty got close enough that day. Its Oka released. A dart of vengeance accelerating on white smoke and faith. It missed our shippy 30 yards. 30 yards. Sis, the difference between a name on a memorial and a man growing old. April 12, 1945. The day Admiral Yamamoto died again. We already killed him in 1943, shot from the sky in his own Betty during Operation Vengeance. But in April 1945, the bombers that carried his legacy died with him one mission. At a time point 14 Bettys launched against our destroyer group. None returned. I saw one explode mid-flight. A perfect sphere of fire, shrapnel spinning like meteors. When the smoke cleared, only burning droplets remained falling in silence. I whispered, "Please, go home." But home was a direction these planes no longer faced. We pilots had survival sewn into us. For them, survival was shameful. That terrifies me even now. The Japanese design philosophy that once stunned the world was devouring its own children. We inspected more captured Bettys that month at Clark Field. No self-sealing tanks, no armor around crew positions, magnesium components that burned white-hot, fuel lines exposed like veins waiting for bullets, engineering brilliance built for a paradise of air. Superiority that no longer existed. Our engineers said, "These planes are already dead before they take off." Their crews knew it too. A sergeant I met, a gunner on a carrier, kept a small notebook. Inside tally marks, one for each Betty shot down. He told me, "I'm not proud of this, I just don't want them to reach us. Because when one did, a ship became a funeral at sea." Later, we recovered a scorched parachute from a Betty survivor. Rare as a miracle, he was barely 19. He kept crying one phrase, "Mother, I tried not to kill you to die correctly." War twists the meaning of everything that I wrote in my flight log. A plane that sacrifices its pilotus, not a weapon. It is a confession. A confession that strategy has failed, that leadership has failed, that the future has failed, and only death remains to worship. Summer 1945, the Betty became the vehicle off-delivered martyrdom that we expected: more waves, more kamikaze, more fire, more screaming sky. But Japan was running out of men to feed the flames. Each week we saw fewer aircraft. Each mission we intercepted ghosts. The silence grew. Not peace, just the pause before something terrible. On August 6, 1945, we heard a rumor: one bomb destroyed Hiroshima. We didn't believe it. Then came Nagasaki on August 9, and belief no longer mattered. The war that burned planes alive now burned cities instead. Fire found a new scale. Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945. That we should have celebrated. Instead, I wondered how many Betty crews waited on runways that morning knowing they would never fly again. How many looked up at a sky they once ruled and felt betrayed by physics be doctrine be history be why men who told them glory was worth more than armor. After the war, I saw a photo in a museum. A Betty bomber sitting quietly in a junkyard, rust eating its bones, wings clipped, empty canopy staring like hollow eyes, no fired, no fear, just metal, forgotten. And I thought, it was never the plane that was dangerous. It was belief. The Betty was designed for impossible dreams, but dreams without mercy turn into nightmares. The Pacific War ended, but the flames we lit still glow beneath the ocean where metal coffins lie in the dark, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see a green shape descending without hesitation and hear the final vow of men who never wanted to live: I will die for the Emperor. But that was not the end. Because the Betty had one last flight to make, for peace. But that was only the beginning. War has a cruel symmetry. The same aircraft that delivered destruction would now deliver surrender. August 19, 1945, Aishima Airfield. Near Okinawa, we stood waiting on the runway. No guns aimed, no helmets on. Just a humid silence thick enough to cut. Our squadron was ordered not to fire no matter what. Harder than any combat order I ever received. Then we saw them, two Mitsubishi G4M, Betty bombers painted white, their green skin hidden under surrender, a giant black cross down the fuselage, no camouflage, deception, just an airborne flag of surrender. They came in slow, too slow. The Betty was never meant to fly peaceful. It wobbled in the crosswind like a wounded bird that refused to drop. Our hearts pounded. Not from fear but from the weight of the moment. After years of chasing these silhouettes through smoke and tracer fire, we now watched them approach as ambassadors of an empire's last breath. The wheels slammed the runway with a crack. Tires screeched. The plane skidded. For one horrifying second we thought it would crash and burst into the fire we knew too well, but it stopped. Silence swallowed the field. The hatch opened, no guns, no orders, just hands. Empty, trembling, raised high. Japanese officers stepped down first, their uniforms dirty, not pressed, not proud. Behind them, the interpreters' faces pale as if they feared the war might restart with a single wrong word. One officer held a briefcase as carefully as if it contained a child that we all knew what was inside. Terms of surrender to end the greatest killing in human history. That I didn't see villains, I didn't see fanatics, I saw men who had run out of sky. We escorted them inside, no shouting, no hatred. Just the quiet voice of a translator. We are here to stop the fighting. The surrender team bowed low. A gesture of apology that shook more souls than any battle ever did. One Japanese major glanced at me. Just a second of eye contact. But I could read his entire war in that moment. Exhaustion, fear, shame, relief. He whispered something. My mother will know I lived. I realized then our victory was not over enemies but over death itself. After the meeting, the delegation returned to the airfield. They were allowed to walk unguarded because no one feared them anymore. A Betty stood waiting, its engines idling like a heartbeat, unsure if it should continue. The delegation boarded, the hatch closed, the pilot signaled, the engines roared, not like they once did with eagerness or defiance, but with old bones creaking, asking permission to survive. The Betty lifted off its surrender. Markings shining in the Suna ghost turning Homito tell Japan there would be no more ghosts. Some of the Japanese on that flight later recorded their thoughts. Point 1 wrote, "Today we chose life over a Norso. Our children could choose both." Those words surprised me. Not because of their poetry but because of their hope. Hope was rare in 1945. Weeks later visited a hangar filled with captured planes. Zeros Valskates, many Betis lined up in silence like soldiers waiting for absolution. Their empire was gone. Their usefulness ended. Point 1 Japanese mechanic approached me. A prisoner now, he placed his hand gently in a Betty's scorched wind gas if saying farewell to an old friend. He told me the truth American intelligence already suspected. We built range instead of life. He tapped the thin metal just millimeters thick. We believed death would never catch us. But death flies fast when hubris is the fuel. Sunway ferried home. For me, San Francisco, then Montana, for the Betty crews. Home was not guaranteed. Thousands of their comrades never made it. Not because they lacked courage, but because courage alone cannot stop bullets from finding fuel lines. History calls them the Betty Boys, but many called themselves something harsher, souls on fire. I sometimes wonder what became of the young engineers who designed such brilliance with such blindness. Did they lay awake at night counting lost crews like beads on a rosary? Did they pray their own sons would never fly the planes they created? Even today historians debate the decision. Madness? El genius? Or simply the wrong weapon for a war Japan could not win? The answer burns somewhere in the wrecks still resting beneath the Pacific. I kept a piece of a Betty canopy, found floating after a battle. Plexiglass yellowed by sun and feared other sits a scrap of war me. It is a reminder that every plane shot down carried dreamslitters, photographs, and prayers. Even the enemy wanted to see tomorrow. Years passed. I married, raised children, became a grandfather. But every August, when the cicadas sing and the air turns heavy like that morning on Shima, I step outside and look up, and I see them, 2 white bombers descending without armor, without protection, without future. Yet carrying peace. Betty Stat finally came home alive, and I whisper to the night sky, war ends, but memories keep flying. Because the story of the Betty Bomber is not about design flaws or military strategy or suicide missions. It is about the fragile place where brilliance meets tragedy. Where a nation asked its sons to burn for glory, and some survived so the world could learn never to do it again. When the war ended, some aircraft were forgotten. Others were celebrated. But the Betty became a warning. A monument to what happens when hope outruns reality. In 1946, I stood in a hangar at Wright Field, Ohio with a team of engineers. We weren't studying a weapon anymore, we were studying every mistake written in its ribs. The thin aluminum, the exposed fuel tanks, the absence of armor. Betty was a blueprint in how to kill your own men faster than the enemy ever could. Point 1 engineer whispered. They gave their crews wings, but no chance to land. He wasn't mocking them, he sounded heartbroken. Because inside those burned shells were pilots who loved their families exactly like we did. So, we began rewriting the rules of aviation warfare. Rule #1. Survival matters as much as range. Maybe more. Rule #2. Fuel should never be closer to bullets than bone. Self-sealing tanks became standard. Armor plating redefined priorities. Rule #3. Defense is not a luxury. It is the greatest gift to a crew. The American B-29 Superfortress proved it. Pressurized. cabin armor fire suppression remote gun turret surviving hits that would have turned a Betty into a starburst. We compared the two aircraft directly for months. The difference? Not engineering skill. Not national intelligence. Not faith. Just choices. Japan chose reach. America chose return. The first time we watched test ammunition hit a Betty's fuel tank, we already knew the result. The aircraft didn't burn, it detonated. The explosion shook the desert soil. Burned rubber and scorched metal choked the air. A young private beside me nearly dropped his clipboard. He asked, "Did they know this would happen?" I stared at the rising smoke. "They knew." Silence. And then he said something I will never forget. How many mothers stitched their sons' names into a uniform that would become their coffin? The Japanese engineers were not fools. Their doctrine was clear. Strike first. Strike far. Strike without needing a runway to return. Their planes needed to reach Pearl Harbor, 4,110 miles at Darwin, Australia, 2,600 miles, British warships near Malaya, 3,200 miles. The Betty made it possible. On December 10, 1941, inches, just 90 minutes, Betty bombers sank the HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, warships believed impossible to destroy from the air. That day the world realized that the carrier had replaced the battleship. That was the moment aviation conquered the sea. But every doctrine has an expiration date. As the Allies grew stronger, as radar reached further, as fighters flew faster, Bettys became flying obituaries. August 1942. Guadalcanal, 18 out of 23 Bettys lost in a single mission. 120 trained airmen killed. April 1943. Operation Vengeance, the mission to kill Admiral Yamamoto. His Betty was shot down. He died in the wreckage of the very doctrine he created. June 1944. Defense of the Mariana Islands, entire groups annihilated before they could get within torpedo range. Still Japan flew them. Still men boarded them. Still mothers waved goodbye without knowing they were waving goodbye forever. In 1945. As defeat closed and the Betty was forced into its cruelest form, kamikaze delivery aircraft. They carried Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka rocket bombs, pilots locked inside. No landing gear, no return plan. Their nickname among Americans, Baka bombs, fool bombs. There is nothing foolish about dying for a belief someone else gave you. 1 Oka pilot wrote in his diary, "My plane will hit and then I will become wind." He was 19 that after the war we interviewed surviving Japanese crew members. 1 pilot said, "The fuel smelled stronger than fear. We knew what a tracer round would do. But we flew. Because duty is louder than fire." Another, "The Betty gave us wings, but the Emperor kept the parachutes." And the quietest voice of all, "I did not expect to grow old." There is a question that military historians debate to this day. Were the Betty crews brave or victims? But the truth is simpler. They were both. Bravery is not about surviving. It is about taking off when you know you might never land. Today, when we tell the story of World War II, we often speak of victories. Midway, Normandy, Stalingrad, El Alamein, Okinawa, but the real story is written in the decisions that killed the most loyal men first. The Betty bomber did its job too well. It flew farther than any bomber its size. It changed naval warfare. It frightened the world. In 1941, Thena's The World Adapt Edit turned into a death sentence signed with wings. When people ask me, why did they build such a dangerous plane? I answer, because in war hope often outruns compassion. The Betty believed in victory long after victory stopped believing in Japan. And that may be the saddest legacy any aircraft has ever carried. Yet he keep one more memory close. A Japanese flight engineer once told me, "We did not fly because we wanted to kill. We flew because home was behind you and honor was ahead." That is not the voice of a villain. That is the voice of a man caught between two tragedies. To live without honor or die without home. The Betty taught the world something we should never forget. Red square range wins battles, green square protection wins wars, blue square humanity decides what deserves to win at all this plain. Fragile fearlessness understood and sacrificed is a reminder that brilliant ideas can become terrible choice if no one survives to celebrate them. The legacy of the Bedius not in the Asher, the statistics are the victories are the wreckage. It lives in a simple truth we carved into aviation history. If you ask a man to die for his country, give him a chance to live for it too. Airfields are quiet places after war's end. Too quiet. Sometimes the silence hurts more than the gunfire. Because when the noise stops, you finally hear the ghost. It was 1949, 4 years after Japan surrendered, that I was visiting a veterans hospital in California to see a friend, a gunner who flew with me during Leyte in Okinawa. That he had burns down his arms. Tracers had turned his turret into a furnace. He survived, but fire is a hard thing to escape. He told me something that changed how I saw my enemy forever. The flames that took our boys were the same flames that took theirs. War does not choose sides. Fire does not sing an anthem. Later that year I found myself in Tokyo, assigned to help document enemy aircraft for archives. The city still wore its wounds, streets like scars, empty lots like teeth knocked out. But among that devastation, life was returning like green shoots after wildfire. Children played baseball in a place where factories once built engines of war. Their shouts replaced air raid sirens. Neighborhoods were rebuilding not from steel and nationalism but from bread and hope. There, I met a former Betty pilot. Not a prisoner. Not a criminal. Just a man trying to live again. His name isn't important. Names are fragile during war. He spoke English well and ought to share his truth. I feared your bullets, but more than bullets, I feared my plane. He laughed, but his eyes didn't. They told us to be proud, that we could fly so far. That I was proud until my friends did not come back. I asked him, if he could change one thing, what would it be? He stared at the ground, then answered, I wish our wings protected us as much as they protected our dreams. That same trip he stood on a beach in Kagoshima. The waves rolled in softly like the Pacific was trying to apologize, and in the distance tiny fishing boats bobbed on the horizon. Peaceful silhouettes where once dogfights clawed the sky. A fisherman came near and handed me something he found while repairing his nets. A fragment of aluminum with faded green paint. A piece of a Betty. He did not know what it weighs or what it meant. But I did. 1,000 hours of flight, 100 lives flown inside. One life cut short all. Contained in this shard. That I held it and it felt warm, though the wind was cool. That it was like holding a memory still burning. Years passed. We created new bombers. Safer, stronger. We sent men to Korea, to Vietnam, to the Gulf. Always telling ourselves we were learning from the past. But when I hear fighter jets today screaming across the sky, I remember the Betty fragile as a lantern lit with gasoline. And I wonder if we have truly learned enough. Some say Japan was foolish to sacrifice protection for ambition. But ambition is what humans are made of. So is fear, so is loyalty, so is love. The decision to build the Betty came from faith that range would save the empire. Faith can inspire miracles. But sometimes faith demands martyrs. Every pilot who entered that bomber knew the odds. Some believed in the emperor. Some believed in destiny. Some simply believed they had no choice. Different reasons, same fire. When their planes fell, they did not fall as enemies. They fell as sons, as brothers, as friends, as men who were told that their sacrifice would change the world. It did. But perhaps not in the way they were promised. Sometimes, when the sun sets in the Pacific orange and fierce, I see a sky the same color as burning gasoline, and I think, we didn't defeat them. We outlasted them, and the ocean still keeps their story in silence. War is not about nations. Or flags. Or leaders. War is about the young carrying the mistakes of the old into the fire. And whether you wore a rising sun or a white star, whether you spoke Japanese or English, whether you returned home or vanished into clouds, your life was worth protecting. Your wings should have been stronger. Your sky should have been safer. They asked me once which plane from the wary respected most. The Mustang? The Corsair? The Fortress? The Zero? I answered, the one that carried men who knew they might never land and flew anyway. The Betty. The bomber that burned bright, too bright. The bomber that proved courage can exist even in the wrong designed, so remember this. The story of the Betty is not about Japan's failure or America's success. It is about the cost off asking humansto be expendable. It is about brave men turned to flame because strategy valued distance over breath. Let their memory remind us that no victorious worth more than the lives of the ones who must secure it. When I close my eyes tonight I will hear them. Radios. Crackling engines, struggling fear, swallowed honor, Rizinga crew ready to disappear for a country that would never give them a fighting chance. And I will whisper, you deserved better. Fly easy now. Your war is over. Because the sky's finally wide enough for all of us to go home.